What would you do if a frantic stranger burst into your workplace and tried to snatch a child right in front of you? Would you look away? Would you call for help? Or would you plant your feet, stand between them, and become an unbreachable wall? For Maya Evans, a 26-year-old waitress just trying to make it to her next paycheck, that hypothetical question became a terrifying reality. She thought she was protecting a little boy from a monster. She had no idea she was staring into the eyes of a desperate billionaire, and that her single act of courage would unravel a 5-year-old mystery and bring the most powerful man in the city to his knees before her. This is the story of how an ordinary Tuesday lunch shift turned into a life-or-death standoff. The Starlight Diner wasn't a place for drama. It was a haven of predictability, nestled on a less-than-fashionable street in downtown Seattle. It smelled perpetually of sizzling bacon, stale coffee, and the lemon-scented cleaner Maya Evans used to wipe down the red vinyl booths. For Maya, this predictability was a lifeline. Her life outside these greasy walls was a chaotic whirlwind of medical bills for her younger sister, Lily, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of never having enough. But inside the Starlight, she knew the rhythm. She knew that Mr. Henderson, the owner, would start prepping lunch at 10:30 a.m. sharp, that the construction crew from the site down the block would come in for their heart-stopper burgers at noon, and that a woman named Isabella and her quiet son, Leo, would take the corner booth by the window every Tuesday and Thursday. Isabella was a woman who seemed assembled from mismatched parts. Her clothes were always a season behind, yet meticulously clean. She spoke with a soft, almost placating voice, but her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were constantly scanning, restless. Her son, Leo, was a ghost at her side, a beautiful, solemn child of about 5, with enormous brown eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. He rarely spoke, communicating mostly through small nods or the tight clutch of his hand on his worn, one-eyed teddy bear, which he called Barnaby. Maya had a soft spot for Leo. She'd seen the way he flinched when his mother's voice sharpened, the way he'd trace patterns in spilled sugar on the table, lost in a world of his own. She always made a point to slip him an extra maraschino cherry with his chocolate milkshake, or draw a smiley face in ketchup on his plate of fries. These small gestures would sometimes earn her a fleeting ghost of a smile, and for Maya, that was like a burst of sunshine on a grey Seattle day. There was something off about Isabella's affection for the boy. It was possessive, suffocating. She'd cut his food into impossibly tiny pieces, wipe his mouth with aggressive dabs of a napkin after every bite, and her terms of endearment, my precious angel, Mommy's whole world, felt less like love and more like a declaration of ownership. Maya, who was practically raising her own sister, recognized the scent of performative parenting. It was all for an audience that wasn't there. On this particular Tuesday, the rain was relentless, hammering against the diner's large plate-glass windows and turning the world outside into a blurry watercolor of grey and neon. The diner was warm and half-empty, a cozy refuge. Isabella and Leo were in their usual booth. Leo was quieter than usual, his face pale, his grip on Barnaby so tight his knuckles were white. He barely touched his milkshake. "Leo, honey, drink your shake for Mummy," Isabella cooed, pushing the glass closer to him. Leo shook his head, his lower lip trembling. Isabella's smile tightened. It didn't reach her eyes. "Don't be difficult, my love. You know what happens when you're difficult." The words were whispered, a silken threat that made the hairs on Maya's arms stand up. She was refilling the salt shakers nearby and pretended not to hear, but her body went on high alert. She watched as Isabella leaned in close, her face inches from Leo's, her voice dropping to an inaudible murmur. Leo flinched, a full-body recoil, and squeezed his eyes shut. He picked up the milkshake with 2 trembling hands and took a tentative sip. A cold dread coiled in Maya's stomach. It was more than just odd parenting. This was fear. The kind of deep-seated, reflexive fear a child should never have for a parent. She moved to their table, forcing a bright, professional smile. "Everything tasting all right over here?" she asked, her voice cheerful, belying the frantic pounding of her heart. Isabella looked up, startled, her mask of maternal warmth snapping back into place. "Oh, yes, dear." "Perfect. My little man is just a bit tired today, aren't you, my precious?" She stroked Leo's hair, but her touch was like a spider crawling. Leo didn't respond. He just stared down at the table. Maya's gaze fell to Barnaby the bear. She noticed something she hadn't before. A small, dark patch of fabric on the bear's back looked different, as if it had been crudely stitched over something else. It was an insignificant detail, but in the charged atmosphere, it felt like a clue to a puzzle she didn't understand. Just then, the bell above the diner door chimed, a harsh, discordant sound against the gentle hum of the room. A man stood there, dripping rainwater onto the checkered linoleum floor. He wasn't a regular. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but his expensive-looking trench coat was soaked through and disheveled. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his face was a mask of raw, frantic urgency. But it was his eyes that stopped Maya's breath. They were a piercing, crystalline blue, and they were burning with an intensity that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't look at the menu board or the empty stools at the counter. His gaze swept the room once, then locked onto the corner booth. Onto Leo. And the world, for Maya Evans, tilted on its axis. The stillness was shattered, and the storm had just begun. The man took a step into the diner, then another. Each movement was heavy, deliberate, a predator closing in on its prey. The few other customers in the diner, a couple sharing a piece of pie, a truck driver reading a newspaper, barely registered his presence. But Maya felt it. Mr. Henderson, wiping down the grill, felt it. And in the corner booth, Isabella most certainly felt it. She had gone rigid, her hand hovering protectively over Leo's shoulder. Her face, which had been a mask of cloying sweetness, was now pale and sharp with alarm. She subtly tried to shift her body to block Leo from the man's line of sight. It was the desperate, futile gesture of a cornered animal. The man's eyes never left the child. He started walking towards their booth, his wet shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Every instinct in Maya's body screamed danger. This wasn't a customer. This was a confrontation. "Can I help you, sir?" Maya asked, stepping forward to intercept him. Her voice was steady, a waitress at work voice, but her heart was a trapped bird beating against her ribs. He barely glanced at her. His focus was a laser beam. "I'm not here for coffee," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was a voice accustomed to command, but it was frayed at the edges with something wild and untamed. Desperation. He tried to step around her, but Maya moved with him, blocking his path again. She was 5'5" and slender, a sapling against his oak tree. But she stood her ground. "Sir, you're making my customers uncomfortable. Please, take a seat at the counter, and I'll be right with you." For the first time, he truly looked at her. His piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through her cheap uniform and tired smile. He saw her resolve. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even surprise, crossed his face. "Move," he commanded, not with anger, but with the cold, absolute certainty of a man who was never told no. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Maya replied, her chin lifting. From the corner booth, Isabella's voice, high and trembling, cut through the tension. "Do you know this man, Leo?" Is this man bothering you?" She was speaking to the child, but her words were a performance for the room. Leo, who had been frozen, looked at the stranger. His big brown eyes widened, not with recognition, but with pure, unadulterated terror. He began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor, and buried his face in Barnaby the bear, letting out a small, choked sob. That sob was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. The man's face contorted in anguish. "Julian," he breathed, the name a raw wound. It was barely a whisper, but in the suddenly silent diner, it echoed like a gunshot. "Julian, it's me, it's Papa!" Isabella shot to her feet. "Get away from us!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He doesn't know you. You're scaring him. Somebody call the police." The man ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on the sobbing child. He took another step, his hand outstretched. "Julian, please, look at me." This was it. The point of no return. Maya knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't let him get to that table. The terror in that little boy's eyes was real. Whatever this man was, whatever his story, right now, in this moment, he was a threat. As he lunged forward, Maya reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a thick glass coffee pot from the warmer. It was half full of hot, black coffee. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "You take one more step, and I swear to God I will use this!" The man froze, his outstretched hand inches from her face. He looked from the coffee pot to her eyes, and for a second, the wild desperation in his expression was replaced by sheer disbelief. He, a man who could buy and sell this entire city block without a second thought, was being held at bay by a slip of a girl with a coffee pot. "You have no idea what you're doing," he snarled, his voice a low threat. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she shot back, her knuckles white around the handle. "I'm protecting a child from a stranger. Now back away, slowly." Mr. Henderson had already picked up the phone behind the counter, his face grim as he spoke in hushed tones to a 911 operator. The truck driver was on his feet, a burly, silent backup a few feet behind Maya. The man, the stranger, looked past Maya to the booth. Leo was now openly weeping, clinging to Isabella, who was whispering frantically into his ear. "He's my son," the man roared, the sound ripping from his chest, full of pain and fury. "My name is Alexander Sterling, and that is my son, Julian Sterling. She kidnapped him 5 years ago." The name hung in the air. Alexander Sterling. The Alexander Sterling, founder of Sterling Enterprises, the tech titan, the reclusive billionaire whose face was plastered on magazine covers years ago before he'd vanished from public life? Maya's mind reeled. It was impossible. This disheveled, frantic man couldn't be him. It had to be a lie, the ravings of a madman. "His name is Leo," Isabella screamed back, her voice dripping with venomous righteousness. "And I am his mother. This man is insane. He's been stalking us." Alexander's face crumpled. The rage gave way to a wave of absolute agony. He looked at Maya, his eyes pleading. "Please," he whispered, the sound broken. "Please, you have to believe me. She's poisoned him against me. My son. I've been searching for 5 years." Maya's resolve wavered for a split second. The pain in his voice felt chillingly real, but then she looked at Leo, still hiding, still crying, still terrified of the man claiming to be his father. A child's fear was a compass needle, and Leo's was pointing directly at Alexander Sterling. "You're not getting near him," Maya said, her voice dropping, cold and final. "The police are on their way. You can tell them your story." The brief flicker of hope in Alexander's eyes died, replaced by a storm of frustration and despair. He knew what this looked like. He knew how it would play out. Time was slipping through his fingers. He made a decision. He feigned a step back, a gesture of surrender. Maya relaxed her stance by a fraction, just a fraction. It was all he needed. In a blur of motion, he lunged, not at her, but around her, his long arm reaching for Leo. But Maya was faster. She dropped the coffee pot. It shattered on the floor, sending a spray of hot liquid and glass everywhere, and threw her entire body in his path. She wasn't strong enough to stop him, but she was a barrier. He collided with her, his solid frame sending her stumbling back into the table. Cutlery clattered. Leo screamed. Maya regained her footing, planting herself directly in front of Leo, her arms spread wide like a shield. She was trembling now, adrenaline and fear a toxic cocktail in her veins, but she didn't back down. She met Alexander Sterling's furious, desperate gaze with her own. "Over my dead body," she hissed. And in that moment, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a cheap diner, a waitress earning $12 an hour stood her ground against a billionaire, the silent, terrified child behind her, the only thing that mattered in the world. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder, a promise of order in the heart of chaos. The piercing wail of sirens sliced through the rain-soaked afternoon, growing from a distant cry to an overwhelming shriek that seemed to vibrate in Maya's bones. Red and blue lights strobed against the diner's windows, painting the tense scene inside in frantic, pulsing colors. Alexander Sterling froze, his hand still outstretched, inches from Maya's shoulder. The sound of the police was a physical blow, dashing the last of his desperate plan. His shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in a kind of weary, soul-crushing despair. He backed away, his wild eyes darting towards the door, as if contemplating an escape he knew was impossible. Mr. Henderson unlocked the door as two uniformed officers, a man and a woman, burst in, their hands resting on their holsters. Their eyes quickly took in the scene, the shattered coffee pot, the terrified woman and child in the booth, the large, imposing man in the center of the room, and the waitress standing guard like a soldier. "Nobody move," the male officer, whose name tag read Miller, commanded. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. "What's going on here?" "That man!" Isabella shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Alexander. "He tried to take my son. He attacked us." Alexander let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "She's the kidnapper. That boy is my son, Julian Sterling. He was taken from his bed 5 years ago." Miller's gaze sharpened, moving from Alexander's expensive but disheveled appearance to Isabella's frightened mother act. It was a classic, he said, she said, but with stakes that felt terrifyingly high. "All right, everyone just calm down," Miller's partner, Officer Davis, said, her voice soothing. She began to gently move the other patrons, the truck driver and the couple, towards the door, taking their preliminary statements outside. Miller approached the center of the storm. "Sir, I need you to put your hands on the counter and step away from the waitress and the family." Alexander hesitated, his jaw tight. For a man like him, being ordered around by anyone was an alien concept, but he saw the cold professionalism in the officer's eyes and knew that resistance was futile. With a final agonizing look at Leo, he turned and walked to the counter, placing his palms flat on the sticky surface. Miller stood between Alexander and the booth, creating a safe zone. "Ma'am, are you and your son all right?" he asked Isabella. "We're terrified," she whimpered, pulling Leo impossibly closer. The boy had stopped crying, his face buried in her side, but his small body was still racked with shudders. "He just came in here and started screaming, saying Leo was his son. He's crazy." Maya remained standing by the booth, her protective stance unwavering. Miller turned his attention to her. "And you are?" "Maya Evans. I work here," she said, her voice hoarse. "He came in and went straight for the boy. He tried to grab him. I had to stop him." Miller nodded, his expression unreadable. "You did the right thing by calling us." He looked back at Alexander. "Sir, you mentioned a name. Alexander Sterling." "That's my name," Alexander said, his voice flat and hard. "Check your database. Missing child, Julian Sterling. Abducted from our home in Medina 5 years ago. Age at time of disappearance, 13 months. Distinguishing marks, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder blade." A flicker of something, intrigue, perhaps, crossed Miller's face. This wasn't the usual ranting of a disturbed individual. The details were specific. Medina was where the real money lived, and the name Sterling, it rang a bell. "And you," Miller said, turning to Isabella. "Your name, ma'am?" "Isabella Rossi," she replied instantly. "And this is my son, Leo Rossi. He's 5 years old. I have his birth certificate, his social security card, everything. This man is a lunatic." She began rummaging in her oversized purse. The diner had become an interrogation room. The air was thick with accusation and suspense. Maya watched, her mind racing. Alexander's story was so detailed, so filled with pain. But Isabella had the child, and the child was terrified of Alexander. Could he be a deranged ex-lover? A man obsessed with a child that wasn't his? The possibilities were dizzying. "Let me see the boy's shoulder," Alexander suddenly demanded, his voice raw. "Just look at his shoulder, the birthmark. It will prove it." Isabella clutched Leo tighter. "No, you're not touching him. You're not laying a hand on my son." "I'm not asking you. I'm asking the officer," Alexander shot back, his eyes boring into Miller. "It's proof. Physical evidence." Miller considered it. It was a reasonable request. "Ma'am, if we can just verify what he's saying, we can clear this all up." "No!" Isabella's voice was becoming shrill. "You can't just undress my child in the middle of a diner because some crazy person makes an accusation. He has rights. I have rights." Her panic was escalating, and it felt different now. Less like the fear of a protective mother, and more like the desperation of someone with a secret. Maya felt a seed of doubt about Isabella begin to sprout. Her refusal was too vehement, too absolute. A mother trying to protect her child from a madman would want the police to prove him a liar as quickly as possible. Why was she resisting such a simple verification? "It's okay," Miller said, holding up a hand to placate her. "We're not going to do anything to upset the child further." He turned to his radio, speaking in code and low tones. He was running the names: Alexander Sterling, Julian Sterling, Isabella Rossi. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Maya could hear the rain hammering the roof, the quiet crackle of the police radio, and the sound of Leo's ragged little breaths. Alexander Sterling stood at the counter, a statue of contained fury, his gaze fixed on the boy he claimed was his son. Isabella rocked Leo back and forth, whispering to him, her eyes darting nervously towards the police officer. Then the radio crackled back to life. A tinny female voice spoke, but Miller shielded the transmission, listening intently through his shoulder mic. Maya watched his face. She saw his eyebrows shoot up. She saw his jaw tighten. She saw his entire demeanor shift from that of a cop handling a routine disturbance to an officer standing in the middle of a 5-year-old capital crime. He turned slowly, his eyes no longer unreadable. They were filled with a grim, chilling understanding. He looked first at Isabella Rossi, and for the first time since the ordeal began, Maya saw a flicker of genuine fear in the woman's eyes. Then he looked at Alexander Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his voice laced with a new, profound respect. "We have a match on the missing persons report for Julian Sterling. It's been active for 5 years. The primary suspect listed in the abduction was the family's live-in nanny." He paused, letting the weight of his next words fill the silence. "Her name was Sarah Peters. She disappeared the same day as the child. She also has a sister named Isabella Rossi." The air went out of the room. Isabella let out a strangled gasp, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror. The lie had crumbled. The siege was over. The truth was about to come out. The name Sarah Peters struck the diner like a bolt of lightning. Isabella Rossi, or whatever her real name was, visibly crumpled. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. Her arms, which had been a protective cage around Leo, went limp. The charade was over. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, you're mistaken. I don't know any Sarah Peters." But her voice was hollow, devoid of the conviction it held just moments before. Alexander Sterling pushed himself off the counter, his body rigid with a mixture of vindication and white-hot rage. "Sarah," he hissed, the name tasting like poison. "It was you. All this time, it was you." He took a step towards her, but Detective Miller put a firm hand on his chest. "Sir, let us handle this," Miller said, his voice a low command. He never took his eyes off Isabella. "Isabella, or Sarah, or whoever you are, it's over. We know you worked for the Sterling family. We know you disappeared the same night as the boy." The woman began to tremble, her eyes darting around the diner, seeking an escape that wasn't there. The exits were blocked. Her lies were exposed. She was trapped. She looked down at the boy in her lap, the child she had stolen and renamed, and her expression twisted into something ugly and possessive. "He's my son!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ragged. "I raised him. I'm the only mother he's ever known. You can't take him from me. He loves me." Leo, sensing the violent shift in her emotions, began to cry again, a terrified, confused whimper. He didn't understand the names Julian or Sarah. He only knew that the woman who was his entire world was screaming, and the scary man was getting closer. Maya's heart broke for him. In the space of 10 minutes, his entire reality had been detonated. She instinctively knelt by the booth, not touching him, but just being a calm presence nearby. "It's okay, sweetie," she murmured softly. "It's going to be okay. You're safe." Leo's tear-filled eyes found hers. He saw the kindness, the familiar face from the diner, and his tiny hand reached out, not for Isabella, but for her. He wrapped his small fingers around her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, a drowning boy clinging to a raft. That simple gesture seemed to be the final straw for Alexander. Seeing his son reach for a stranger for comfort while cowering from the woman who stole him and still terrified of him was a torment beyond words. The rage in his face was replaced by a wave of profound, gut-wrenching sorrow. "What have you done to him?" he asked Isabella, his voice cracking. "What have you told him about me?" "I told him his father was a monster who didn't want him," she spat back, her words laced with years of resentment. "I gave him a better life, a life where he was loved." "You stole him," Alexander roared. "You stole 5 years of his life, 5 years of my life. I've been through hell, searching every day, every night, while you were playing house with my son." Detective Miller had heard enough. "Isabella Rossi, you are under arrest for the kidnapping of Julian Sterling," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent." As Officer Davis moved in to cuff her, Isabella completely unraveled. She began to fight, to scream obscenities, her carefully constructed persona of a loving mother dissolving to reveal the bitter, unstable woman beneath. "Leo, baby, don't let them take Mommy. Don't leave me." But Leo didn't look at her. He pressed his face into Maya's side, his small body shaking, his fingers still clamped around her wrist. The arrest was messy and loud. Isabella was eventually subdued and escorted out of the diner, her crazed screams echoing back through the open door before being swallowed by the rain. And then, silence. A heavy, painful silence descended upon the Starlight Diner. It was over, but nothing felt finished. In the center of the room stood a billionaire who had just found his long-lost son. In the booth was a little boy whose world had been shattered, and between them was a waitress, covered in coffee stains and fear, who was somehow the bridge over an impossible chasm. Alexander took a slow, hesitant step towards the booth. He looked so different now. The frantic anger was gone, replaced by a vulnerability so raw it was painful to witness. He looked at his son, this little boy who should have known his face, his voice, his touch, and saw only a stranger. "Julian," he said softly, his voice thick with unshed tears. It's Papa." Leo peeked out from behind Maya's arm, his big brown eyes filled with suspicion and fear. He shook his head. "My name is Leo," he whispered. The words, so small and defiant, struck Alexander like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as if to hold his own breaking heart together. 5 years of lies had built a wall between them that a simple revelation could not tear down. Maya felt the boys trembling and knew this was too much, too fast. This reunion couldn't be forced. "He's in shock," she said quietly to Alexander. "Everything he's ever known has just been ripped away." Alexander nodded, swallowing hard. He looked at Maya, truly seeing her for the first time since the standoff began. He saw the genuine compassion in her eyes, the way the boy trusted her. "Thank you," he choked out. You saved him." "I just didn't want him to get hurt," she replied simply. Detective Miller cleared his throat, bringing them back to the grim reality. "Mr. Sterling, we'll need to take the boy to be checked out at the hospital, and we'll need your formal statement, and yours too, Miss Evans." Alexander's attention snapped back to his son. He couldn't take his eyes off him. Then his gaze fell on the one-eyed teddy bear, Barnaby, still clutched in Leo's, Julian's, other hand. A strange new light came into his eyes. "The bear," he said, his voice urgent. "Let me see the bear." Maya looked at him, confused. "What?" "The teddy bear. His name is Barnaby," Alexander said, a faint, watery smile touching his lips. "His mother. My late wife. She made it for him before he was born. She stitched something inside the back seam for him, for safekeeping." Maya's mind flashed back to the detail she had noticed earlier, the crudely stitched patch on the bear's back. With trembling hands, Alexander pointed. "There, on the back. There's a small silver locket inside. It has my initial A on the front." Gently, Maya turned to the boy. "Hey, Leo, can I see Barnaby for just 1 second? I promise I'll give him right back." Terrified of letting go of his only comfort, the boy hesitated. But he trusted her. With a small, hesitant nod, he handed her the worn teddy bear. Maya turned it over. There it was, a patch of dark brown fabric, sewn with thick, clumsy stitches that didn't match the rest of the bear. Her fingers traced the outline. There was a hard lump underneath. She looked at Detective Miller, who nodded. Carefully, Using her thumbnail, Maya began to pick at the rough stitches. They came away easily, revealing the original seam beneath. She worked her fingers into the small opening in the stuffing, and then she felt it. Cold, hard metal. She pulled it out. Resting in the palm of her hand was a small, tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped and delicate. Engraved on the front, in elegant script, was a single letter. A. The lie was not just unraveled, it was annihilated, and the proof had been in a little boy's hands the entire time. Detective Miller took the locket from Maya's hand, his expression a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. He handled it with a reverence usually reserved for key evidence in a homicide, which, in a way, this was. The death of a 5-year-long lie. He pressed the small clasp. The locket sprang open. Inside were 2 tiny, faded photographs, protected behind miniature panes of plastic. On one side was a beaming Alexander Sterling, younger, his face free of the lines of grief that now seemed etched into his skin. On the other side was a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, holding a swaddled infant. Alexander let out a choked sob. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain and love. "Lillian," he whispered, tracing the air where the picture of his late wife lay. She wanted him to always have us with him. He looked at Maya, his eyes swimming with tears. "My wife passed away shortly after Julian was born. That bear, it's the last thing she ever made for him." The story, already tragic, now took on a new layer of heartbreak. Maya's chest ached with empathy. This wasn't just about a father finding his son. It was about a man reclaiming the last living piece of the woman he loved. Detective Miller showed the open locket to the small boy, who was still half hidden behind Maya. "Look here, son," he said gently. "Do you know who these people are?" Leo, Julian, peered at the tiny photos. He stared for a long time at the picture of the baby, then at the man, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pointed a small, hesitant finger at the photo of Alexander. That's the crying man," he whispered. It was a child's simple, devastating observation. He didn't see a father. He saw the pain that had been a torrent in the diner just minutes before. But then he looked at the picture of the woman, Lillian. He stared at her smiling face, and something shifted in his own. A flicker of something ancient and deep, a memory not of the mind, but of the soul. He reached out and touched the photo with the tip of his finger. "Pretty," he said softly. Alexander knelt, his expensive suit pants soaking up the spilled coffee and grime on the diner floor. He didn't care. He was now on eye level with his son. He kept his distance, not wanting to scare him further. "Yes, she was very pretty," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was your mama, and she loved you very, very much." The word mama hung in the air. For his entire life, that word had belonged to Isabella. To hear it applied to a face in a photograph was a seismic shock to his 5-year-old world. He looked from the locket to Alexander's face, then back again. The first seeds of understanding, of a truth deeper than his conscious memory, were being planted. The paramedics arrived, a calm and efficient team who knelt and spoke to Julian in soft, reassuring tones. They needed to take him to the hospital for a full evaluation, a standard procedure. A female paramedic with a kind face smiled at him. "Hey there, little guy. We're going to go for a little ride in a big van with cool lights. How does that sound?" Julian immediately shrank back, his hand tightening on Maya's arm again. His world had been upended, and the thought of being taken away by more strangers was too much to bear. "No," he whispered. "I want to stay with Maya." Everyone looked at her. The billionaire father, the seasoned detective, the paramedics. In the wreckage of this family's life, She had become the one stable thing, the single point of trust for a terrified little boy. Maya's heart clenched. She was just a waitress. Her shift was supposed to have ended an hour ago. She had to get home to Lily. But looking into Julian's pleading eyes, she knew she couldn't leave him. Not yet. Is it okay if I ride with him in the ambulance? She asked, looking at Miller and then at Alexander. Just until he gets settled at the hospital. He's been through so much. Alexander's expression was one of profound, overwhelming gratitude. Yes, he said immediately, his voice hoarse. Please, whatever he needs, whatever you need. Detective Miller nodded. I don't see a problem with that. In fact, it's probably for the best. Ms. Evans, we'll get your full statement at the hospital. And so, the strange procession departed from the Starlight Diner. Julian, clutching Barnaby the bear, allowed the paramedics to lift him onto a gurney, but only on the condition that Maya hold his hand the entire time. Alexander Sterling followed behind, a man adrift, watching his son be cared for by the very woman he had threatened and lunged at less than an hour ago. The ambulance ride was quiet. Julian didn't speak, but his eyes never left Maya's face. He seemed to be drawing strength from her, his small fingers a constant, trusting pressure around hers. She spoke to him in low, soothing tones, telling him about the silly things her sister Lily liked, about the pictures she drew. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She just offered him a small island of calm in his ocean of chaos. When they arrived at the Seattle Children's Hospital, they were whisked away to a private wing, the kind of place Maya never knew existed, with serene lighting and hushed, carpeted hallways. The Sterling name had clearly cleared a path. A team of doctors and child psychologists was waiting. Alexander was there too, having followed in a police car. He stood in the doorway of the examination room, a helpless giant, as the doctors began their gentle work. Julian finally let go of Maya's hand, but he insisted she stay in the room, sitting on a chair in the corner where he could see her. Maya watched as a doctor with kind eyes and a gentle touch checked Julian's vitals. He then asked, Buddy, can I just take a peek under your shirt? We just want to make sure you're strong and healthy. Julian looked to Maya for permission. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. Hesitantly, he allowed the doctor to lift the back of his t-shirt. And there it was, on his left shoulder blade, just as Alexander had described it. A small, perfect, crescent-shaped birthmark. The final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Alexander made a choked sound from the doorway and had to turn away, pressing a hand to his mouth. The visual confirmation, the tangible proof on his son's own skin, was devastatingly real. This was his son, his Julian. He was home. But the journey back to each other's hearts was only just beginning. Hours bled into one another in the sterile, quiet environment of the hospital's private wing. Julian was given a mild sedative to help him calm down and was now sleeping peacefully in a large, comfortable hospital bed. The one-eyed teddy bear, Barnaby, was tucked under his arm. The locket, now cleaned and gleaming, had been placed on the bedside table, a silent testament to the day's earth-shattering events. Maya sat in a chair by the window, nursing a cup of coffee someone had brought her. She was physically and emotionally exhausted. She had given her statement to Detective Miller, a surreal experience of recounting the day's events, her words feeling inadequate to describe the terror, the instinct, the collision of two worlds in the middle of a humble diner. She had called her neighbor to check on Lily, promising she'd be home as soon as she could. Now, there was nothing to do but wait and watch the boy sleep. The door opened softly, and Alexander Sterling walked in. He had changed out of his rain-soaked clothes into a simple dark sweater and slacks, likely brought by an assistant. He looked less like a wild, desperate man and more like what he was, a powerful, important person who was utterly broken. He didn't speak for a long time. He just walked to his son's bedside and stood there, his gaze tracing the boy's peaceful face. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from Julian's forehead, his touch feather-light, almost fearful, as if he expected the boy to vanish. The love and pain radiating from him were so potent they felt like a physical force in the room. Finally he turned to Maya. His piercing blue eyes, once filled with fire and rage, were now clear and filled with a profound, humbling emotion. "Miss Evans," he began, his voice low and raspy. "Maya, there are no words in the English language sufficient to express my gratitude." Maya just shook her head slightly. "You don't have to. I'm just glad he's safe." "He's safe because of you," Alexander stated, his voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. "The police told me what you did. You put yourself between him and me. I was not myself. I was a man who had been chasing a ghost for 5 years, and when I finally saw him, I lost all reason. I could have hurt you. I could have terrified him even more. But you didn't flinch." He took a step closer to her, his hands clasped together. "You didn't see a billionaire. You didn't see a powerful man. You saw a threat to a child, and you became a shield. In a world where most people would look away, you stepped into the fire. Why?" The question was genuine. He truly wanted to understand. Maya thought for a moment, her gaze drifting back to the sleeping boy. "I have a younger sister," she said softly. "Lily. She has a rare autoimmune disease. I've been her primary caregiver since our parents died. I've spent years in hospitals, fighting with insurance companies, protecting her from things she's too young to understand. I guess when I see a child who is scared, my first instinct isn't to think, it's to protect." She looked back at him, her honest, tired eyes meeting his. "When I looked at Leo, at Julian, I saw fear. That's all I needed to see." Alexander's carefully composed facade finally broke. His eyes welled up, and a tear traced a path down his cheek. He walked towards her, and Maya, thinking he was going to shake her hand, began to stand up. But he didn't stop. In a movement that seemed to defy all the power and prestige associated with his name, Alexander Sterling sank to his knees on the hospital floor in front of her. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical gesture. It was a collapse. The weight of 5 years of agony, the sudden, shocking relief, and the overwhelming gratitude were too much for his legs to support. He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. He bowed his head over their joined hands, and his shoulders began to shake with silent, racking sobs. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he whispered, his voice broken and muffled. "You gave me back my son. You gave me back my life, my soul." Maya was stunned into silence. Here was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the country, on his knees before a waitress who had to count her tips every night to see if she could afford Lily's medication. She was embarrassed, humbled, and deeply moved all at once. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please get up. You don't need to do this." He looked up at her, his face streaked with tears, completely stripped of pride. "Yes, I do," he insisted. "I want you to understand. Anything you want, anything you need, it's yours. A new house, a new car, your sister's medical bills, consider them paid for the rest of her life. Name it. There is no price on what you did for me." The offer was staggering, a fairy tale solution to all her worldly problems. A week ago, a month ago, She would have wept with relief at such an offer. But now it felt transactional. It felt like he was trying to put a price on an act that had come from her heart. Gently, she pulled her hand from his grasp and knelt, so she was at his level. "Mr. Sterling," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "Alexander, I don't want your money. I didn't do it for a reward." His brow furrowed in confusion. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to get to know your son," she said, her voice filled with a simple, profound sincerity. "I want you to be patient and kind with him. I want you to help him heal from this. That's the only reward I need. Just knowing that he's going to be okay." Alexander Sterling stared at her, truly seeing the depth of her character for the first time. She was more than a courageous bystander. She was a woman of immense integrity. He had offered her the world, and she had handed it back, asking only for the well-being of a child she'd known for a few short weeks. He finally, slowly, pushed himself to his feet, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "You are an extraordinary woman, Maya Evans," he said, his voice filled with a new kind of awe. At that moment, a small voice from the bed murmured, "Maya." They both turned. Julian was stirring, his eyes fluttering open. He wasn't looking at the powerful man by his bed. He was looking for the waitress in the corner. He was looking for his safe place. And in that moment, Alexander Sterling understood that the debt he owed Maya wasn't just about her bravery in the diner. He would need her help, her kindness, her unique connection with his son to help bridge the 5-year chasm that a kidnapper had carved through their lives. The reward she refused would have to take a different form, one that was far more meaningful than money. A month later, the Starlight Diner remained Maya's anchor in a world that had tilted upside down. The media frenzy had been a chaotic storm she'd weathered by keeping her head down and her apron on. While she deflected reporters, quiet miracles occurred in the background. An anonymous benefactor had erased her sister Lily's staggering medical debt and enrolled her in a world-class treatment program. Maya knew it was Alexander's doing, a gesture of gratitude she couldn't refuse. She continued her shifts, finding comfort in the familiar scent of coffee and the rhythm of routine, even as she felt a chapter of her life drawing to a close. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and her world shifted again. Alexander Sterling stood there, not as a frantic stranger, but as a composed man whose eyes held a new, quiet warmth. Holding his hand was Julian. The boy was no longer a ghost. He was vibrant, dressed in a bright yellow raincoat. When he saw Maya, his face erupted in a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "Maya!" he shouted, letting go of his father's hand and running to her. He wrapped his small arms around her legs in a fierce hug. Kneeling to embrace him, Maya felt her heart swell. This was the only reward that ever mattered. "I've missed you, kiddo," she whispered into his hair. Alexander approached as they settled into the corner booth, a familiar scene made new by hope. "He insisted on getting a milkshake from Maya's place," he explained, his voice soft. As Maya prepared the drink, Alexander's expression turned serious. "I have a proposal for you," he began. "You were right. Money isn't enough. Julian is healing, but he needs stability. He needs you. But I'm not offering you a job as a governess. I'm starting a foundation in my son's name. The Julian Sterling Foundation for Missing and Exploited Children. It will have the resources to change lives, to bring other children home. And I want you to run it." Maya was stunned. "Me? Alexander, I'm a waitress. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation." "I can hire people to teach you business," he countered, leaning forward with an intense sincerity. But I can't hire your heart. I can't hire your courage. I need someone with your integrity at the helm. Your first duty would simply be to be a part of Julian's life, to be his friend while we find our way back to each other. The offer was staggering. It wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a chance to transform her protective instinct into a force for good. She looked at Julian, happily sipping his milkshake and beaming at her over the rim of the glass. She saw the trust in his eyes. Then she looked at the billionaire father, a man who had been brought to his knees and had risen with a new, humble purpose. Her life at the Starlight had been a safe harbor, but this was a chance to build a lighthouse. A slow, determined smile spread across her face. "Okay, Alexander," she said, her voice filled with a strength she never knew she had. "Where do I start?" The story of Maya Evans reminds us that heroes aren't always the ones with power or wealth. Sometimes they're the ones pouring our coffee, the ones who, when faced with a critical choice, listen to the compass of their heart. Maya's single act of courage didn't just save a child, it reunited a family, exposed a dark secret, and forever changed the course of 3 lives. It proves that one person's integrity can be more powerful than a billionaire's fortune, and that the most profound connections are forged not in boardrooms, but in moments of shared humanity and selfless protection. Her journey from waitress to protector, and finally to a leader, shows us the extraordinary potential that lies within an ordinary life. If this story of courage, a father's undying love, and the incredible strength of the human spirit moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that heroes are all around us. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true, inspirational stories that will restore your faith in humanity. What would you have done in Maya's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.